which is, think about how much, this is a great example. Think about how much damage those evil priests did.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great example.
Look, most of the people that I've spoken with who proclaim themselves to be atheists are atheists for two reasons. And I mean the good faith atheists, let's say. First of all, they tend to be tilted in the engineering cognition direction, so they're much more oriented towards things than people, and that's a stable temperamental trait. But they've almost all also invariably been hurt by someone or some institution that's claimed to be religious. And then you could also see that
that's right.
Obviously betraying someone, in Dante's account of the Inferno, when he goes down to the bottom of hell, he finds the betrayers right next to Satan,
yes,
right?
Judas, Crassus,
yeah.
and Brutus.
Right,
All
right.
three of them.
Okay, so the idea
and the lake of ice, which is...
Right, that's where Satan is encased, right? Because he's too brittle to move. Yeah. So the reason for that, I think, is that there isn't a more upsetting psychological phenomenon than being betrayed. You stake yourself on someone, you trust them, they're now a foundation, they're part of the foundation of your life.
Completely.
Oh, so, and there's no worse form of betrayal than betrayal that's done in the name of the highest good, right? I mean,
yes.
There can't be, obviously.
Yes.
Okay, so, all right, so I thought that sin against the Holy Ghost was something like rejection of the Abrahamic call. You know, God comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. He says, go out into the world, leave your zone of comfort, move away from your people, and have the terrible adventure of your life. Well, if you reject that, you can't develop.
Yes.
Right? Because you're rejecting the spirit of learning
And think of how
itself.
many young men are rejecting it every day.
Well, what's terrible about that, this is something we could talk about too. I'm curious about your experience. It's been my experience that it doesn't take that much encouragement for the people you're describing to be inspired to try. Now, I've talked to thousands of young men now who've had that experience, you know, like I see a lot of them at my lectures. They come to the meet and greets, for example, and they tell me, it's great. It's really great. They tell me that, you know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, because it's starting to be a long time now, 8 years ago even, they were not in good shape. And they came across my lectures or books and decided that there was something worth aiming for, and then decided to try. So to tell the truth, that's a very common vow, let's say, to take on more responsibility. And they usually laugh about starting to make their bed or something like that, which is a lot less trivial than people think. And then it's straighten them out. The terrible thing is how little encouragement that actually took. And so why are people coming out to see you on campuses, and what kind of response do you get from the people that you talk to?
The responses have been incredible. First, the crowds alone, we're drawing crowds of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people in the middle of the day just for me to debate a random college kid or a college professor. It's remarkable.
So walk me through one of those events, Charlie.
And so I've been doing that for a decade. So I started, as we know, we started Turning Point USA. One of the things I really wanted to make sure is that I was in touch with the target audience that I was trying to convince and trying to persuade. No better way to do that than just go to the college campus itself, set up a card table with, you know, maybe a poster that says something like, you know, I think government should be smaller, something like that, and start a discussion. I would do this at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I would do this at University of Illinois when we had almost no funding, no connections, no idea what I was doing. I've always believed in the grassroots interaction. Similar to your meet and greets. No data, no chart, no abstraction can get to that personal human-to-human contact. So I've been doing that for many years. And then Steven Crowder, to his credit, kind of popularized this idea of debating and putting it on. I said, oh, well, why don't I also film these interactions? And so I started to do that around 2018. So it's been about 7 or 8 years now. And, you know, then 10 kids would show up and then 20 kids. And we started to put these on the internet, and kind of concurrent and simultaneous to your rise, where you diagnosed what was going on in the West quicker and more accurately than anybody else, especially with young men, we started to see our popularity increase as we started to address some of the underlying problems that young people were facing, but in particular, young men were facing. And then COVID happened. We were basically out of business for, a year in the sense where we weren't able to do campus activities. Donald Trump was no longer in office, and we had to really kind of rebuild on campus basically about 2 years ago. So let's just say the spring of 2023, things really started to change, where we would do these campus events prior, and we would bring in your traditional conservatives, 300 to 400 people, maybe a couple 100 interested types, maybe 50 liberals, 500 students, call it a day. That's a success. All of a sudden in 2023, we were drawing a different type of person and student. First of all, we were drawing people outside of the campuses that were welders, electricians, and plumbers, and the working men that heard that we were in town, and they just
how'd they hear?
Social media.
Okay.
And so decentralized promotion. And so they would show up. And I saw that. I mean, these were guys that would go up to the question line, and they were not asking about Rousseau, or they were not asking about Jacques Derrida.
Yeah.
They were saying, how do I be a better person because I'm expecting a daughter in 6 months?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And all of a sudden, here I am, not in the position where you are, nearly as seasoned to give advice to that young man, but he's searching and he's looking for anyone that seems to have an idea of how the world is supposed to work, that is professing a worldview of order and structure and discipline.
Something that he could do.
Yes, and then he was looking to me for advice, and that was a different dynamic. Whereas prior, all the questions the last 8 years before that were, hey, Charlie, what do you think about the tax rate? What do you think about abortion?
Right.
And I still get a lot of that, but it was something different. It was young men especially that were seeking purpose and seeking a destination.
So this is crucially important, this transformation, because one of the things so let's go back to that 60s dynamic, that anti-authoritarian 60s dynamic. The role of the left in the 60s was like an entrepreneurial progressive radicalism, let's say. And the stance of the conservative was, well, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, guys. And that's a pretty good dynamic, because you need a force for change and you need a force that resists that. But I think what the conservatives did wrong, like profoundly wrong, was that their brakes, this is why they're always dismissed as reactionary. Their brakes, B-R-A-K-E-S, their brakes were fundamentally, they're also moralistic. It was finger-wagging. And this is something that was distasteful, let's say, especially about the hypocritical, evangelical conservative types.
I agree with that.
Okay, but it was also strategically inappropriate, because it's very hard to say to young people who might tilt in the progressive direction, because they're a little more revolutionary in spirit, let's say, or also a little more immature, that the reason that to abstain sexually, for example,